Another bad idea is no appointing kings. In the section, we read the first section of the Torah talks about how Yiftach became the guy in charge. What does it say? Well, it says Yiftach was originally a reject, a societal reject. Why? Because apparently his father, who also had the name Gilad, there's quite a few people with the name Gilad. Okay? Aside from the land being called Gilad, Menashe had prominent descendants called Gilad. But in this case, it's a different Gilad, obviously. It says, Gam b'nei Machir ben Menashe, you will do al birkei Yosef. Machir's sons, Machir was Menashe's son, right? So his own sons, Yosef basically served as sandik for his great-grandchildren. And one of Machir's main sons was Gilad, who was born in Egypt. But this is, 3.5 centuries after the Exodus we're talking about. So it's a little bit later. This is not the same Gilad. But this fellow Gilad had many children, and Yiftach was the son of, they say, an Isha Zona, right? It wasn't exactly, the best, had the best family history. So he was basically pushed out by his brothers so that he not get a share of the inheritance. And Yiftach blamed the local Zakanim for allowing his half brothers to do this to him. But they came back, crawling back to Yiftach and saying, "Look, you're the only person fit to lead." So it says that Yiftach had a whole negotiation with the Zakanim if they'll make him the Rosh, as he says, Rosh and Katzin. And he became the Rosh and Katzin. Why? Because they realized they needed to appoint a leader who could fight this war. So Yiftach became a shofet. As I said before, Rambam recognizes the shofet, even if he's, like Chazal say, Yiftach Hador Kishmuel B'doro. Your generation will either have a Yiftach or a Shmuel. We prefer a Shmuel, but sometimes you get a Yiftach. So you have to have leadership. And we saw that the Shoftim had certain responsibilities and also, well, in Hebrew, the direct translation would be authorities, but they had the jurisdiction. They also had the right. They held on to certain powers to do this. What does it show us? That the idea that we should not appoint kings, right? We're not allowed to have leadership. A king, let's say, or any other form of leadership. It doesn't really matter what title you give him. This idea that we're not allowed to do so unless the Messiah shows up. This is basically nowadays it's a Haredi idea, but this is something that held that back Jews for a long time. They got so used to not having national leadership that they began to think that we will not have national leadership, and we are not allowed to have national leadership until the Messiah shows up. He is going to be the next national Jewish leader, and that's it. We're not allowed to do it before. What does this sound echo? What does echo? The idea also that we are not allowed to go back to Eretz Yisrael until it's the actual ingathering of the exiles by the Messiah. Somehow it's miraculous. God himself shows up, wings of eagles, magic carpets, Tekabah Shofar Gadol Chirusenu, and we're just forced back into the land of Israel. But until that happens, we're not supposed to go. Or the idea that we are not supposed to do anything to rebuild the temple. And we must wait. It's going to happen miraculously, so we have to be completely passive, and we are not allowed to actively do anything to bring about the rebuilding of the temple, right? So this is just yet another example of that. We are not allowed to have leadership until the Messiah himself comes. And that's absolutely wrong.
Doesn't sound very Maimonides.
Well, it is very Maimonides.
No, to say no.
The Rambam says, no, we have to have a king. And but Rambam points out right before that, what comes before Hilchos Malachim, Malchamos, the idea that you're supposed to have a Sanhedrin and courts. The Sanhedrin is led by a Nasi. That's the most basic thing. A Sanhedrin will recognize a king, and sometimes the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, is a stand-in for the king in certain generations. He also has certain authorities, right? He has certain. Come on, Leon, give me the word here.
What?
The samchuyot. See, I'm thinking in Hebrew too much now. Prerogatives. Okay, like that's the fancier word. That's the $5 word for what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the problem is now that the vast majority of Jews who claim to follow the Torah at least hold this way subconsciously. There are certain segments of Jewish society, Orthodox society, that actually say this outright. They'll say, before the Messiah comes, no moving back to the land of Israel, or having mass settlement in the land of Israel, even a Jewish country. That's forbidden. You have to wait for the Messiah to come. You're not allowed to have national leadership. You're not allowed to have the building of the temple. It all has to be done by the Messiah. We have to take a completely passive attitude. So you see when we read the story of Yiftach, how that's nonsense. They were being threatened, so they said, "Look, we don't have an ideal candidate for leadership right now. We don't have a Shaul, we don't have a David HaMelech, we barely have a Gidon or an Ehud, but we'll take what we can get. At least someone who believes in God, someone who wants to fight." The fact is that Yiftach shows us that his grasp of halacha was quite weak, right? Making the way he made flippant vows and actually went through with them afterwards, right? And his attitude, it doesn't make, they basically describe him, his upbringing as being so good, having a mother like that, and then says, "Lakatue love on a b'nei bliyal," he had a whole bunch of misfits, and that's a nice way of saying it, who basically, who surrounded him, but he became their leader. What? Yeah, but he became their leader. He showed that he could actually he was basically a Jewish gangster who was able to project power, and that's why they appointed him. So we rather not have leaders who are like Yiftach, but when, the Machon Shilo, the next main leader after Yiftach, even though it says, fellows like Ivtzan and Yisachar, who's the fellow from Yisachar, who has a name similar to Yisachar's own son. Dodo, what is his name? Is his father? I'm forgetting my shoftim now. But there was men like Ivtzan and other minor judges who ruled for a few years between Yiftach and Shimshon. Basically, when we pick up with the story of Shimshon, figure this out. It talks about the birth of Shimshon, and then when he became an adult, he started really causing trouble for the Philistines, and he was around for 20 years. But we read about Yiftach preceded him, and then a few other minor judges, which means that the story of Shimshon's birth basically happened during Yiftach's time, right? Because Shimshon took over after these minor judges. Okay, yeah, it's an order, it's a chronological order. So sometimes you end up, we saw that this time, later era of the judges, sometimes the judges weren't exactly the highest caliber. Shimshon himself couldn't even command an army. He was just a one-man show. And Chazal say he had a little, as you could see from the text, he had a little bit of a problem with his urges. Right? He was, but Chazal said, the Torah, the Navi even says, why was Shimshon so interested in Philistine women? It was from God. It was part of God's plan. Okay.